Hey, and welcome to episode 4 of the podcast. We're going to call it Seeds. So, anyway, that's done. I'm Jay here with Lo. What's a good, What's good, buddy?
What's going on, brother? I'm glad we got this shit figured out. How you feeling over there? Did you get everything sorted, dude? I know that was kind of fucking annoying.
Oh, well, kind of annoying would, imply that I'm extremely fucking frustrated. But what I'll say is that there's another one in the chamber here, so I'll be just fine. You know what I mean? I just
Glad
have
to
to
hear.
I have to recenter myself. When technology doesn't cooperate, I think it's most important to remember that it is not required to cooperate, dude. They're tools built by people to accomplish a task, and 90% of the time it's user error, and I don't really wanna I don't really wanna delve too deeply into that can of worms because 90% of the time the finger pointing needs to be pointed directly at my face. How you doing today, dog?
Hey, I'm doing all right, brother. I'm excited to have this pod with you, dude. Talk about some things. It's been about a week or so, or maybe two. We had the holiday. So yeah, bro, let's get it fucking cracking. You said you wanted to start with the album moving to this new site. If you can fill me in on that, what's going on with it?
Yeah, man. So Coast Contra is a group that I like a lot, and they released that freestyle a few years back, 2022 or so, and that took off and got a lot of really good connection with. We talk a lot about the culture. Certainly, it's through and through with these guys. Think Earth Gang, think Flatbush Zombies, think. I mean, it's got that old school vibe with a real gritty lyricism that makes you feel like you're living through the stories with them. They're very creative in the textures of their sounds too. It feels so rich. Anyway, they dropped an album back in January. It's called "In Case You Forgot," and basically that I don't really understand the details. There really isn't a whole lot of information on what exactly happened, but it went up on your Spotify, Apple Music, Tidal, Amazon Music, all that kind of stuff, and then it just disappeared. And apparently, they got shafted by the record label or some kind of deal because they moved it to a site called GetEven.biz, and it's where you pay the artist directly. So like they charge a minimum price for the album. In this case, it was $10, but you can pay what you like, 15, 20, whatever. 10 is the minimum to get it, and then but you have to listen to it on that app. But they offer other exclusive access, things like that, so it's cool to use. And the artist gets the money, basically, with way less interference, overhead, and nonsense than the streaming platform. So, I've been looking through there and seeing what artists use that site, and I've really been enjoying it. This album is awesome. I mean, I wish we could play it on here. For all the reasons that's not possible, but um, a few of my favorites off it. I mean, '08 Obama is a great one. Title, the album title track, "In Case You Forgot," is amazing. Mountain Climbers, those will be my three favorites, and there are only 6 tracks, and they're all good. So
Word.
they're just they're the real deal. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, what it sounds like to me is, something that's been a huge issue. I mean, there's always been a desire for artists and all sorts of artists to have, more control over their work. Um, we've talked about the industry and how, there's these holes that you can fall in when you have a huge talent, but not a lot of resources. And so, if this is something that's, helping the artists and giving them more control and allowing them to retain, more of that compensation so that the corporations don't get it because, they've been exploited for decades. These majors, um, they have so much power, right? That they can get you in this deal where you're like, all right, it seems like I'm doing well and my music is doing good, and I'm getting the numbers right. The data is there, the streams are there. But when you're independent and you have something like this website that it sounds like it's just giving them more of the a chunk of the change, well, that's always inspirational to make more great music. I think, when you're stressed about, well, damn, my album, I spent my entire life on this album or on this project, and just to discover now that I'm getting pennies on the fucking dollar, um, to share my art, you're being taken advantage of. So I think it's important for artists to have this platform. Let's see how it works, because a lot of times these big these giants, dude, they'll get rid of that. They'll buy the company out through a third party, and you'll be right back under their fucking thumb. You know what I mean? So let's see how this plays out. But
Hey,
I'm all for that type of shit.
yeah, me too, but you'd be right about that. And you know what? Something else that pisses me off? Let me tell you right away. The people that say, okay, well, these artists wouldn't have the ability to distribute their music to their listeners without the infrastructure that these companies provide. I'm like, okay, yeah, that's true, right? Maybe they wouldn't reach quite as wide an audience, but let me say this: those same corporations and same companies, the same individuals who run them, who hold these beliefs and the institutions that they've created, right? They don't want to pay taxes and recognize the fact that they couldn't do the things they do in terms of, I don't know, having a stable internet to distribute their information, or roads to disseminate whatever they're using.
Right.
The highway system, where they hire trucks to take their CDs wherever they go back in the day, or what have you. There is a complex infrastructure of interconnectedness that drives all commerce and you know just any economic endeavor. So to say that, like, well, we've got to control this process because we own the infrastructure that facilitates distribution is ridiculous, because all of those things, like, imagine the internet as a similar um as a similar thing to the highway system. To use that example specifically, it's like we all pay into it in order to be able to have access to something that works and is reliable and serves all of society. Now, I know that, Apple Music isn't quite the same thing, but in amalgam, it's the same deal. You're going to own the ability to have access to all of these people and their interest in music or what have you. And you're going to say that because you built it, using investor money, or your, whatever, you have exclusive rights to that entire process. And by function of what you were describing, which is buying out smaller businesses that seek to compete or solve a problem within the industry, they're effectively able to dominate, whatever I don't know, whatever industry or subcategory, that they're in. And then, the be all end all, the fucking end game is that it's kind of it becomes an exclusive club where people are able to gatekeep and decide how much money other people make, and make sure that they're always getting, 51%.
And sometimes more than that. Um, you know, that's why I love these other platforms that allow the content creator to basically grow their business and keep um, most of their compensation that they're generating, right? Because Yeah, we get it. They want to say, well, you wouldn't have this or that, and you using our platform, but we're the talent, we're the creators. So they should always, and to keep a healthy relationship with the creator, so that they're not fucking depressed that, hey, I got 10 million people listening to my shit, right? But I'm struggling to pay the fucking bills, right? Because I got this, maybe, sometimes they give you an advance and they say, oh, here's 100 grand. And you got to use that to put that back into your business, or, whether it be a pod or an album, and you got shows, and all you trying to do at the same time is lock the fuck in and focus on what you want to be doing, the creating part. But the humanity comes in where you're like, dog, I still got fucking bills to pay. I got mouths to feed. I need some money now. Because, all that shit gets paid out quarterly, and there's all different little details to it. But, you know, don't
You
fuck
mind to
the,
check your phone real quick,
yeah,
bro?
yeah, don't fuck the creator over, because you do that, then you get these artists who be like, you know what, I'm going to decide to not even create anymore because it's too fucking stressful.
Yeah. Well, that's absolutely true. Um, because it's that attitude that is the most dangerous, right? Because it acts as if the world doesn't belong to all of us. Just because people were here first, or set up some kind of I've just been obsessed with this idea of systems. Like they have momentum in the world, and to decide in advance that, because like planting a flag on the moon, or colonization, it's like this idea of owning the ability of people, specifically in this music circumstance, owning the ability of people to access the attention and awareness of other people. That's a dangerous game to play. You're going to say that you have to be on my platform or subscribe to my thing. It really frustrates me because what you're doing is limiting. You're limiting and gatekeeping in such a way that funnels energy in the world to yourself. In the form of money most of the time, certainly, but also, like,
Yeah.
people have to come to you, bro. You know what I mean? People have to come to you like you're the doorman and put $5 in their palm. You know what I mean? And like a handshake, in order to be able to get in there and talk to their friends and family on some shit. This is ridiculous. I'm high and angry, dude.
Word. So what's going on? Tariffs, dude. I've seen the drama going on about it. I mean, I know it's just the beginning, right? When all this shit hits the fan and catches up, like what are your thoughts on that, and what this administration is doing when everybody's watching? I think right now everybody's watching, right? Everybody wants to know, like, all right, what about us? What about the guys that this stuff is going to affect, right? People who may not have that nest egg, or uh, have the resources to weather this storm. I mean, you got to have a strong sense of empathy for those who are going through hardship in this time, and that even goes into whether it be Ukraine or domestic issues that we have. I think, but it's always like important to have that context that this is something that we are kind of used to in the African American community. I mean, we've often experienced the oppression and the systemic bullshit, but I don't know, you never want to wish that on somebody else or any other these other communities, but I think a lot of people who are oblivious to the fact that you know this shit has been going on, and you motherfuckers not doing your due diligence by fucking uh researching and being concerned with something other than yourself, right? You've empowered these motherfuckers to now where they're like, oh my god, it's so fucked up what's happening to people. And it's like, Well, yeah, this is why we tell you to do the things in your community. You know what I mean? Uh, and don't just jump on these fucking bandwagons and getting angry at people when you don't got the fucking facts.
Yeah, and I appreciate you saying that because it immediately put me in a better mood, bro. Honestly, like thinking about all these things can be so frustrating, and like the deal with it, with tariffs, with foreign policy of every variety, not just economic, but with with Ukraine, with you know Israel and Palestine and Gaza, all that entire region, the conflict that exists is connected, to all the others. But I just think it's important to recognize, as you said, that we need to come at it from the direction of love. It's like, okay, well, we may get so angry with people for pressing in, and we have to, for pressing in on and attempting to suffocate the fire of life. I hate to say it that way. It seems so esoteric, but it covers more to say it that way. It is that generalized force, that exists in people or what have you, that that it comes from fear or jealousy, anger and resentment. Sometimes it's righteous and sometimes it's not, but it leads us to tear things apart or believe that we deserve more or better than other people. And all of that shit is wrong because even to get where we need to get, we can't just rid the world of everyone who's angry, or everyone who's bitter, or everyone who's manipulative, or everyone who's cruel. Because if we do that, then we become them, and then we just have a world filled with the same kind of people. It's just us instead of them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, like, we have to actually choose a new way to solve these same problems, because the old ways don't work, because we still have the same problems. And I'm not saying that people have done wrong, although they have, and I have. No one is above it. I'm saying that as we move forward, if we genuinely want a better world, if we sincerely want change, we have to solve hatred with love in a way that makes sense. And I'm not saying we all need to roll over and turn the other cheek and, bare ass. No, we don't need to do all of that. But what we do have to do is reconsider being reactive. We've got to choose to be kind when we'd rather choose the easier route of being cruel. And this isn't a new idea, bro. This is just as this idea is just as ancient as these problems. It's just that the
Tale as
only
old as
way for
fucking
it,
time. Yeah.
yeah, we in order for it to really work, we've got to really do it. You know what I mean? You can't solve a situation with love and expect it to have resolution if you don't teach and educate and support the idea of people engaging with love. you know
Right.
and you can call it love, and you can call problem solving genius, and you can call healthcare and saving lives compassion, and all of the people that do all of those things every day um, are connected to that great thing. But it all seems to be one great unifying force, if that makes sense. Like, I don't think you get to be genius without connection. I don't think you get to be in love without connection. I don't think you get to have revelation without connection. And I think connection and love might be very similar things. And I think that when it goes wrong, we might call it cruelty or hatred, evil, and then that leads more towards disconnection. But once again, these ideas aren't old, these ideas aren't brand new, and this isn't even a new way of saying it. I just think it's worth saying again.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, bro. Like, you gotta be. I mean, it sounds cliche, but you gotta be a part of the solution, or you're just a part of the problem. You know what I mean? And what that means to me is just like, yeah, we're looking at it. Some people are looking at it like, well, shit, I got my own shit. I've been fucking struggling. I've been trying to tell you motherfuckers this. It was like, well, now more than ever, because in my community, we've always used the social platform, social networking to kind of bring awareness, right? Get people talking about it, um, and then capitalize off of that, and that comes with like protesting or rallies or whatever. Just get enough of the people, uh, and I hate to use this term, but awaken. You know what I mean? Like you have to wake them up out of this fucking stupor almost. And then when you do, you got to capitalize off of it. You can't really. It's not time then to point fingers or what I mean, uh, choose sides, but be like, all right, it's about fucking time. Now we're talking about it. What can we do? Here's what we need. You know what I mean? Because this seems like to certain communities, especially people who suffer from like poverty, it seems like a distraction from bigger things that they're trying to solve in their own communities when they're like, listen, you're talking about a recession, you're talking about tariffs, you're talking about struggle, whatever. We've been fucking starving. We've been struggling, dude. I don't, you know what I mean? And that's the way they look at it. And what that does is it makes the other side look at it like, well, that's not gonna fucking help because they may actually not know. You know what I mean?
Well,
Like when you're not in it, it's hard to know.
but and then there are the people that know and simply say, "Well, it's not my problem. I don't care."
Right.
And then they actively say, "Well, in order to justify it in their own mind, they say, well, I must be more deserving, more intelligent, more whatever, and so I'm better off than these other folks." And that's not true either. And that is a poor way of thinking that is born as a natural result of their desire not to experience guilt or any kind of cognitive dissonance related to the fact that they're not any more special, any more deserving than anyone else. However, they're in better circumstances than other people, and they're trying to reason their way around it. And that's the conclusion that many people come to. They say
Right.
fortunate or what have you. I'm fortunate enough to be intelligent, to have good parents, or and that's being charitable. Some people just say I'm fucking better, which isn't true. None of that's true. And and the most incredible thing for me, bro, is to recognize that solving a problem with love really has to go deep. I'm not a naive person, right? I understand that it's been law of the jungle. I don't know really what that parable is called, or maybe it's like a Brothers Grimm tale, like the lion and the hare, right? Like the lion is dying in a cave, and all of the forest animals come around and they're piping up. They're like, "Yeah, you scared us your whole life. It's time for you to die." And the little the rabbit comes up and is no longer afraid. And it's kind of like telling him off or whatever. And he says, and he raises his head up one last time and says, you know I was a lion once. And that seemed to be the moral of that story. However, you look more deeply into the nature of things, and you see, well, in a perfect world, right, you would be able to negotiate from a position of weakness. And that's kind of the thing that I'm driving at, which is it's kind of been law of the jungle, right? And in the law of the jungle, the lion fucking eats. You know what I mean?
Facts.
And you can't be the person who's been taken advantage of for centuries. You write down the line to your ancestors and expect to have a chance in the world, in a level playing field, when in reality all of that lack of access to all of the tools and knowledge that society has to offer, compounded over centuries, does have a real effect. And pretending like that's not the case is not only disingenuous, it's dumbassery, right?
Right.
And it's true for the black community. It's true for so many different communities around the world, especially and mostly minorities. But once again, I'd like to connect us with the fact that we're moving into an era, I believe, where the real differences, the most important ones, are going to be whether or not you're rich or poor. And all of these historical legacies are going to continue to play a huge role, and cultures are going to continue to evolve and change. And all of that information is important, but I think it's worth saying that we're going to have to start considering the fact that solving these problems with law of the jungle tactics is not going to work. We're going to have to choose love. But let me say, it may not happen in our lifetime, bro. And I'd like to lighten the mood by saying this. If it's going to be law of the jungle, the lion fucking eats. Um, my belly's full. You know what I mean? I don't mind. We'll do it that way if we have to. I just prefer not.
Yeah, and I think right now is the time where people should be focusing on these community-based economic growth because that's where it starts, right? Like we really can't control or dictate uh, these areas where we're not prevalent and involved, and so seeing now that hey, people really don't want to create goods; they want to consume them, and it's a good time for entrepreneurship. It's a good time to grow business, but then also share that information so that your community has that financial literacy to withstand whatever obstacles may come because uh they know how money works. A lot of times when you're angry or when you're hurting, you kind of just think about the problems you're facing instead of solutions, right? And so right now it sucks, and it's been sucking for a long time. But when you see the famine, right? If you want to use that jungle theory, when you see like, all right, resources are tight for everyone, lions included. This is how you say, all right, what can we do? What goods can we store? You might have some people just like you would in the jungle who wouldn't normally work together or be concerned about what's going on in areas that they don't necessarily give a fuck about. But now it's a good time to say, hey, this affects all of us. So yeah, I can't just worry about the forest. I got to worry about the outskirts. I got to worry about the fish. I got to worry. You got to worry about everybody, and you do that keeping that in mind, and share this information where people know how to make their own money, um, and then how to navigate that money in a way where when shit, because the economy is gonna go up and down, right? That's just the way of the fucking road. Uh, but if you know what to do and how to do it, as much as they don't want to share that information, when you know it, you can benefit from it. So I would say to the listeners is in your communities, start trying to grow, you know, start focusing on economic growth right there at home. And that stuff can be infectious in a way where they say, you know what, this community used to be shit. It had so much crime, drug problems, whatever. But because they invested in the community first, somehow, they're thriving. And, other people see that, and more of
Yeah,
us start to realize that, hey, wait a minute, we all kind of, I want my community to thrive too, and so let's get away from these old traditions, and let's try to do it right here in our backyard,
right.
and then
And that's,
and then
bro,
things will
that's it
grow.
right there.
Yeah.
Like, like we I talk so much about ideas, and I think ideas are very important. But that's the rub, and that's the practical solution, right? Is like we don't want the whole thing to burn to the ground, and we can, we can take our petty grievances and our serious ones, and we can run it up until everything is ruined because we can't get over it. And there are things that are so hard to get over, and we shouldn't have to. And all of that is true too. But at the end of the day, if we cannot come together to recognize that building community is going to be the savior of all of us, education and awareness and spending time together, dude, I think we could all stand to be a little bit more together. I think that, social media really has brought us further apart than anything else because we're attempting to construct a facade of ourselves that is pleasing to the world. We're trying to actively cultivate that, and it creates a very distinct barrier to authenticity in my mind. And so, when we talk about building communities, I mean, when you really get into it, you have to generate trust and love in order to be able to understand that it's okay to be yourself and have people, go through that process where people bite back and people are a little bit nasty. In the real world, that's always going to happen. I mean, even if we generate a utopia tomorrow, there'll be people born next week that in 5 years might be a little asshole. You know what I mean? You might
Fucking
grow up to be a little asshole, and that's just kind of the world, because people grow
assholes.
up and then they see things a little bit different, and then they get a little bit offended, or get a little bit turned around on something. Maybe they don't get shown enough love and they don't think it exists as much as it should, or they don't think they've gotten what they deserve or been given a fair shake. And 99% of the time they're probably right about that. And then they decide, well, I'm gonna turn that around, man. You know, I'm gonna be involved in, bringing more negativity into the world by being reactive to the shit that was so upsetting to me. And then, that's how the ball gets rolling on some real negative shit going around. It just, you just like a touchstone. You just hit it and then it goes right down the line on some domino shit. And you
Yeah.
can do that. But if we can start absorbing a little bit of that, just our little share, and don't turn it around and get angry. Like, for example, when this podcast started, I was getting real frustrated with the whole situation, and it had nothing to do with anything but me. I was getting attached to my expectations of getting things started. And when that didn't happen, I got upset that my expectations weren't met. And then I started looking for reasons to get angry about that. Like, my expectations should have been met. The equipment should work, things should get started on time, whatever. And that's such a little thing, man. And yet I carried some of that energy with me forward. And I'm aware of this stuff, and I made that mistake. So there are people unaware of so many of these ideas, and they're walking around and I'm cutting that shit out now by understanding that it's no big deal. Some people have bigger things happen, don't know any of this, carry it forward forever, multiply it into infinity, and then all of a sudden it's a real big walking dangerous firestorm. And I don't know, there's things like that going on, big and small. And I think you're right. The way to solve it is to grow some good stuff. If you focus on that and aim that direction, then that's where we're gonna go.
I hope we can, my dude. I hope we can. And I think we can. I mean, you have to believe that uh, it'll work out. You just look at how far behind we are, and you're like, well, goddamn, this makes for a good time. Let's take it back to the fucking hippie age. Uh, and maybe all of us just need a little more fucking bud in our life, dude. A little more smiles and a lot less fucking tight asses, dude. Because making the ass tight, dude, doesn't really help. You got to get that thing relaxing, dude. You don't want to be all fucking worked up because it just works you up even fucking more. And now I'm fucking worked up just thinking about it. You know what I
And then
mean?
your butthole is so clenched you could cut a carrot into sections with that bitch.
Yeah,
And
and
it's
then
like, it's
like,
what's the point of that, dude?
come on, like, each one play your role, dude. Like nobody has to be, and it's not a good feeling, bro. We've talked about it on this pod before. It's not. You don't want to be a fucking dick, you know. Hey, what's going on with this pope, man? I've heard we lost another pope. Now, this is not the pope that I know. I grew up with that pope who got shot once before.
John Paul II, or I think it was John Paul II. That was way back. I think, bro. I mean, I think he passed in like 2003 or something. Yeah, and then
Word?
we had, yeah, we had John Paul II, then Benedict 16, and then this is Francis, who Pope Francis, who passed. And we just talked about not being frustrated and being more positive. So I'm not going to talk about any of my problems with institutional religion. But what I'll say is that he was a good man, and it's a shame for the world to lose such a soul. And I think as we move through all of this and the bureaucratic process of the conclave, which is the Catholic way of selecting the new pope, where the cardinals, who are like the leaders, under the pope, who are above the archbishops, and then the archbishops are above the bishops, and then the bishops are above the priests, and that's kind of how the structure works. If the listener's unfamiliar, the cardinals will go in and they will select a new pope, and that process is just as political as you might expect. Francis was really an outlier, man. He was not a person who was so connected to the dogma of the church really in a way that was conservative and traditional, like so many popes that had preceded him, in the last 100 years or so, or whatever. He was a person who was authentically involved in caring about people in ways that mattered. And I think that in many ways the church held him back. But in terms of thinking about things in certain ways and so on. But, he was genuine and kind and made the choice to put people first. And so it is a shame to lose him, especially at this time. Um, I
So
don't want
much
to
goes to
see.
matter to people, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, man. I mean, for in so much as anyone in that position could be, he was a man of the people. And I think now, we may see a person who is a lot more bureaucratic, and kind of like focus on the strictures of whatever it is. And I think that would be a poor move. I think that multiplicity and um, learning that what it looks like doesn't matter so much as what it is.
Yeah, my
Learning
aunt.
that is going to matter, because the Catholic Church is really obsessed with tradition. I think we've got to get over that.
Yeah, my aunt, she's she's an older lady, and we talked about it briefly the other day. And she did say that Pope Francis was trying to focus on communities that weren't always included, or may have been ridiculed or looked down upon by the institution. And so, I'm not sure how old he was or if he was sick or anything. But I know, like, Christianity, which is kind of similar, but that's huge in the African American communities, where my aunt was like, she was sad, to lose Pope Francis. And you know um I know that she did talk about it. He did bring some African American or some black officials. I don't know if they were cardinals or bishops, but he was trying to push for that. So when you start to realize, and I talked to this to one of my buddies who's he's like a biker, and you know how the bikers are. I mean, I'm sure listeners may know what's going on with that. And he was talking about him trying to do some of that same stuff. It's like, hey, are we trying to have a brotherhood here, and we want to organize. We can't be saying who and who can't, be included, or who deserves grace, uh, and who doesn't, based on something, just because they look different, or they're from a different background. If they're down for the cause, they should be included. And if they have, uh, bring something to the table that can help uh, the people, then you know let's get past all this. You've never seen, kind of like what the Obama campaign, the symbolism that was supposed to do is just to show that, hey, we can do other things. You can run for this office, you can hold this office. uh and obviously we know that there's a lot more to that, that has to go in your favor in order to make it to chief of office. But I think for the next generation, for sure, they should be able to see that, this is because, when you think about religion, right, that's supposed to be something that's good. It's generally like a family thing, right? So you grow up with your relatives, the people you love and care about, practicing this religion or these values. And so you want to say that, these are good values, and you want to believe in them. And you don't want to then find out, later down the line or whatever, that, you know they're full of shit, or they're not holding everybody accountable, um but being more, like, negative, and separating people and telling, people for who they love, or what they've done, that they're fucking doomed for eternity, that, that's not cool.
No, no,
So
it's very not cool, dude.
yeah,
That's
because what you're
about
doing is you're making those people to say, well, I don't fit, and I'm not good enough, or whatever, or
sure.
something's wrong with me, and you know, um, whatever that higher power may be God or whatever, or that they don't love me, whatever. And so that's how you get people who just be like, I don't want to be an atheist, or I don't want to give a fuck about some of, and those we talked about some of those values and morals, and are good ones to have, right? You should love your neighbor. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
You
but
should.
faith, right? Is different than spirituality, and spirituality is different than religion. And this is my thing: is religion does not own ethics, does not have control or dominion over the realm of morality. That is not something that happens, and it's something that people often believe, like morals come from religion. It's a very common misconception, and it's just not the case, right? Like, you understand that killing someone is wrong, you understand that hurting someone is wrong, and that doesn't necessarily need to come from an idea that is connected necessarily to a specific religion of any variety. It is something that is natural to human compassion, which is something that predates any of that stuff.
Right.
I need people to understand that, like, I'm coming from a place of love. So if religion is a good thing in your life, and you like going to church, and all of that is important to you, then I'm very happy for you. You know what I mean? I'm not trying to talk you out of something that is a joy and a pleasure for you to experience. And
Right.
just don't let it lead you astray. And I think when you build up an institution that is geared toward telling people about their connection with the divine, with forces beyond their understanding, control, comprehension, possibly even awareness. Like, um, you're setting up opportunities for people with manipulative intentions to take advantage of people. That's always going to happen when you have something like that. And so I think it's better to have, religious and spiritual conversations in communities, families, and among individuals rather than having some larger authority. I grew up in the Catholic Church and I understand about it, dude. And I understand what it's like to have layers of authority between, you perceiving that there are layers of authority between you and God, as a young person. It's not a good thing. I don't think it can ever be a good thing. I think the whole idea is wrong, and I don't blame people for getting to where we've gotten. I blame the people who are assholes, but I am coming from a place of love, and I'm trying to love people who are really evil too. And sometimes loving people who are evil means stopping them from doing more evil. And that's a really revolutionary idea, I think. But honestly, it's just it's the truth, and I think it's up to people to recognize the truth. I can't force them, but I think I'm comfortable to say that that's the truth. Sometimes what love is stopping people from hurting other people. And I think one thing that really hurts other people is telling them what to believe and what not to believe. I don't think anyone should be doing that. Talking about things, giving information, providing insight, offering opinions, fostering growth. That's different than telling someone how it is about the God stuff, about the life stuff. Don't tell someone how it is. You can invite them to figure it out. You can say, "Well, this is how I see it." And you know what? You can even just tell someone how it is, but they ought to be able to ignore you. You know, and
Right.
who has a hard time ignoring grown people talking about how it is? Children that don't have a choice. You know, that's why keeping religions out of schools is, to me, absolutely essential. Don't and I went to a Catholic school, and that was a choice my parents made. And I don't really even want to get into that too much. I mean, I think it should be a choice. You could go and do that if you wanted. I think that public schools ought to be the most excellent education you could possibly get, so well funded, well maintained, and well structured that they churn out the best and brightest. I think if you want to go to a religious school, you could. But let's say that's another complex issue. It's just like don't have it to where people have no other choice than believing your way of thinking, even outside of religion. That's 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 1984 shit, even if it doesn't seem that way to you.
I agree. I agree. And that's another thing I wanted to talk about before we end here. But I've seen a lot about these these sexual assault cases, and how um there's these are sensitive topics, right? Because obviously you want justice for the victims, and it's something that I believe, like we talked about, the laws, the natural laws, right? Taking a person's life. I mean, no one should be assaulted. And so you want to take all these allegations with a serious approach, because it's so complex, these cases, and so you try to lean into focusing on due process being there and getting all the facts, and determining whether there's criminal charges or just civil charges. But there's different stereotypes about it, right? The perception of it, all parties involved. I think in this case, just a sports guy, former NFL player, Shannon Sharp, who's another podcaster, um, going through this situation where he's being sued, and it's I don't know if it's the second or third case or whatever, but it seems like he's been targeted for a while, because there's this notion that certain people in media are treated differently, And even with the Harvey Weinstein situation, I'm hearing that he's going to get a retrial because they're trying to basically end this Me Too movement and give the power back to what would be the assaulters. And this is something, a power struggle that is very similar to the one in religion, right? Where you have like young people who are coming seeking guidance, seeking mentorship, and so for them to be taken advantage of by somebody who's supposed to be, an official, or somebody who, in your religion, you go to your church or your school, be it Catholic school or whatever, you expecting these people to protect you, no different than you would, your parents, people, family members in the home. But what that does to believers, if you will, or just the people who are seeking true guidance and peace within themselves, they make these entities synonymous with the actions of the individual. Um, and so a lot of times that will set them on a path to not even be open to determine the difference between, faith, religion, etc. Because
Exactly.
we're all looking, for answers within ourselves. We talked about that, I think, on episode one, and love and it being the greatest power. Uh, but I think, certain things, I think, can be forgivable. Certain things can be treated, but something like that should be the ultimate price paid. I mean, for you to take advantage with your power, when to dim someone's light in that way,
Right.
that you
Yes.
may not be able to correct. You know what I mean? I think is more damaging than even some of the smaller issues, or things that you might shun or say a person. We know right from wrong, right? I think we establish as adults, you kind of just know when something's right, and when you're doing something wrong, especially if it's affecting someone other than yourself. Things that you do to yourself and you're responsible for, and you've chosen to suffer the consequences of, that could be a little different. But when you're talking about others and someone else being responsible for your fuck up, I think that penalty should be greater than any, for you to use scare tactics to, shame a person, uh,
Yeah, we're I mean we're
rob their
specifically
innocence. Yeah,
yeah, we're specifically talking about, you know, the people who, who do this, taking advantage of young people, in the industry, but it applies to anything.
absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm hoping that people got some good information from that. And, I know that you got some stuff lined up, but I enjoy this pod. I hope the listeners know now that we're on.
Oh, well, it seems we've lost Low. Um, yeah, I appreciate you guys bearing with us. Hell, it was 3 o'clock in the morning when we started recording, and you know, I hope you did get what you needed from the podcast, and I hope you'll join us next time. And yeah, I appreciate your patience. Have a good one.